Personally, I really love opera. It's my total favourite form of music performance. I have to admit though, it was a very up and down journey, as at first I thought it was just a lot of people singing loudly at each other in a foreign language, and I didn't have the faintest idea what was going on. I've invited Killian Farrell here today as he is conducting the Irish Chamber Orchestra's collaboration with the Blackwater Opera Company in several performances of Verdi's opera Macbeth. And I hope he's going to explain, what is opera all about? Firstly, Killian, you've conducted opera all over the world, and I wanted to know, when did you really fall in love with opera as an art form?
Well, it's a very good question, and I remember very specifically my first opera experience, which was going to La Boheme in Verona when I was about 10 or 11. I was very fortunate. I had wonderful parents who were very culturally interested, even though they didn't have a background themselves, and they thought it was a good idea for their son to be sent into the choir to sing and learn piano, and just sort of part of a general education. I think my dad has always loved maths in particular, thought that the more music I did, the better at maths I would become. And to his disappointment, I've ended up becoming a professional musician. That's a separate matter. He almost succeeded on that point. So we were on holidays in Italy, and my mother thought it would be a good idea. We were in Verona, and you can get these seats in the amphitheatre where they do opera all summer. And she thought, as a family, myself, I was probably 10 or 11. My younger sister must have been 5 or 6. So it was ambitious to think she would take the two of us there, and our attention would be kept. But she had this plan, and as a result, then she'd bought the CDs beforehand. We were listening to them in the car for months, and told us the story, and bought us a DVD or a video cassette, whatever it was back then. And we were really well prepared to go into this opera performance. I remember thinking it was absolutely wonderful, even though in retrospect I had no idea what was going on whatsoever. But when you're 10 or 11, you are well able to suspend your disbelief and just enjoy what's happening. And it was also the spectacle. It was sitting there in this big amphitheatre. It was probably midnight, which was well past my bedtime, and that was also exciting. And I remember enjoying the experience very much, even though the details are fuzzy, probably because I did fall asleep during it.
So I notice you say you have to suspend your disbelief. What is it about opera that means that you do have to do that? I mean, why do you have to?
It's a very good question, and you have to suspend disbelief because, in the words of the poet W.H. Auden, people don't sing when they're feeling sensible. And it's not a natural reaction to situations to sing. That is, I think, one of the main issues that we have to deal with when we're going to see an opera, because people are also there. I mean, there are many factors. Firstly, people are normally singing in foreign languages if we're English speakers, as we are. There are, of course, English operas. I'll come to that in a second. But when we go to see an opera in Italian or French or German, the situations are incredibly dramatic, and people react to them in very undramatic ways, in the sense that it's not at all realistic. Someone gets stabbed and it takes them 12 minutes to die, like the end of Rigoletto, because we need to work through the rest of the story until they can successfully shuffle off the coil. And these are situations that come up in opera all the time, because we're dealing with these heightened emotions, and people aren't singing normal prose. They're normally singing poetry in languages we don't understand, rhyming poetry, and it does just seem to be a ridiculous situation. And because of this, we need to suspend disbelief in order to come into the story. And then there are also so many operas that have ridiculous plots. In fact, I would struggle to name 5 operas with sensible plots now that I'm thinking about it. And I think as a teenager, when I started to get into opera, I was able to suspend my disbelief because the languages were foreign and I didn't speak them. And it was only when I heard my first English language opera, which was Peter Grimes by Britten. I must have been about 15 or 16 when I got the CD out of the library, and I stuck it home, and I brought it home and stuck it on and listened to it. And I thought, this is ridiculous. I mean, why are people singing? They could just be speaking this. And it was the first time that I was confronted with the fact that the foreign language is for us a very helpful thing, because it can actually help us suspend that disbelief. Whereas when we're listening to an English opera, or an opera in English, it can be very different. We can, because it's more accessible to us, it's also harder for us to put that filter up and just appreciate it as a piece of heightened drama.
Mm-hmm. And so with Macbeth, the Blackwater Opera Company and Irish Chamber Orchestra. Do you think that it would be useful for the audience to listen to it before they come, or just come along and experience it for the first time and have the spectacle, the sound of the orchestra all mixing together? What would you advise them to do?
I always think it's a good idea to listen beforehand. And I think nowadays it is so easy. I mean, you can go onto YouTube and you can listen to the most wonderful recordings. You can even go onto YouTube and see older videos of productions of Macbeth from Italy. And it's not... What I always say to people who are going to see an opera for the first time is that every bit of familiarity helps. So seeing an opera for the first time can be wonderful and exciting and overwhelming, and it can also sometimes just be too much because you're getting so much stimulus. You're hearing the music for the first time that has so much power and emotion and energy. You're trying to understand the story in a foreign language which you may not speak, and there are just so many factors to take in. And I think that any bit of familiarity that an audience member can have before they go to see an opera is a great thing. So I can only recommend that if you're going to come and see us, that you listen to it on YouTube beforehand. It's not about listening intently. You can just have it on when you're in the car driving or hoovering or whatever you're doing. It's just about getting this familiarity, because then when you go to see it, you will think, I know this tune. And immediately you have a completely different emotional reaction. And even I suppose I go to opera professionally. That's now my job, either to perform it or to watch it. And going to see a new opera for me is always it's not always the best experience I have, because I'm also trying to take all these things in first. And I find that the better prepared I am beforehand, the easier it will be. And Macbeth is very accessible because it's only an hour and 20 minutes in the first half and an hour in the second half. The length also does help, because you will be entertained from beginning to end. Whereas if you go see Wagner, although I spend a lot of my time doing Wagner and I love his music more than anything, even still, you need to commit yourself to a good 6 hours. And we don't need that of you in Blackwater.
That's perfect. And the very last question I wanted to ask you, when you come to a new orchestra, a new opera, a new environment, shall we say, I guess there's a lot of anticipation, but I wondered, what are you most looking forward to about this period of work with the Irish Chamber Orchestra and the Blackwater Opera Company?
That's a lovely question, and I'm not trying to flatter you when I say that actually it is working with the Irish Chamber Orchestra, because I have never worked with you before, and I'm Irish, and I studied in Ireland, and I lived there until I was 22, and I went to many concerts, including some of them with the Irish Chamber Orchestra and the RDS, that were some of the most amazing musical experiences I'd had. And I was so inspired by Jörg Widmann when he was there and what he did. And for me, getting to work with the Irish Chamber Orchestra is really a great privilege, and I'm so looking forward to coming home and doing that. Working at home in Ireland is always very special. I don't do it a lot, and it's a particular privilege to be able to come home, because I've had a huge amount of good fortune having moved away and having gotten to work in very good places and be so inspired by my wonderful colleagues in Stuttgart or Dresden or wherever I am, and being able to come home and even take just a little bit of that with what I've learned, and being able to use that in Ireland to work with Irish musicians and people based in Ireland, it's for me really a privilege. So and of course also getting to do Macbeth is a wonderful thing. I think for every conductor, conducting Verdi is something very special, but these big Verdi operas like Macbeth, they're terrifying because they're so in some ways they're so plain. I think that's what makes the music of Verdi so special, is that it's often just these sort of very martial rhythms that are always in 4/4 and very, very square. And it's not like Puccini when you get 50 years later, where he was writing these grand melodies and rich orchestrations and harp arpeggios everywhere. But because Verdi is because it's so strong in the sense that it's also so unadorned, it's terrifying. There's so much in it that you need to think about, with the style, with the way that you bring it across. And getting to do Macbeth in Ireland is also a nice thing. I'm very glad that I don't have to do my first Macbeth here in Stuttgart or in Italy or somewhere like that. Getting to do it at home is also quite special, because I'll have hopefully a friendly audience. So that's also for me really a privilege, that it's somewhere that I get to do my first big Macbeth.
Killian Farrell, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. I really appreciate it.
It's been so lovely chatting to you. Thank you very much for having me.